Right, up next is Raúl Hernández Sánchez. He started as a chemistry professor at Rice University in 2022. Prior to joining Rice, he was an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Sanchez's group integrates synthetic organic and synthetic inorganic chemistry to create novel functional materials and catalysts that are capable of activating small molecules at polynuclear sites, the creation of novel contorted aromatics, and the design of anion receptors for removing toxic chemicals from our environment. Raúl, thank you.
Well, hello everybody, and I guess I'll start by thanking ACS and C&EN Chemical and Engineering News for providing this platform. So I decided to pick this title. I hope you find the analogy there with the very famous movies. So everything I'm going to tell you essentially revolves around a macrocycle. Macrocycle used in very different ways to tackle three different problems. So these are the challenges that we're interested in tackling. One, activating small inert substrates, most of them gases, by designing new catalysts inspired on enzymes. We're also inspired by the revolution that came upon by the discovery of carbon nanotubes, fullerenes, graphene. And so I'm going to be telling you about how we're developing new synthetic methodologies to create tubular architectures, and now more recently 2D materials as well. And last, we're interested in purifying drinking water, right? We all drink water. It's inherent to the human being. And I've always been fascinated by creating large molecular assemblies. Most of those are going to fall under the umbrella of this particular macrocycle. This is racemine, and we like it because it provides rigidity. It provides functional groups that we can use to construct large molecular species on the top. Some of my friends tell me, why are you interested in large molecular assemblies? Well, maybe that's because of how I was raised up. So I'm from the state of Chihuahua. This is Mexico. So just like in Texas, everything is large in Chihuahua. Well, not quite everything, right? I mean, we all know about this dog. Anyhow, so in these three images, I'm showing you a crystal structure that represents each of these programs that I'm going to tell you about. So I'm just going to tell you 2 slides on each program and how we're modifying this particular macrocycle. As you can see, it's right here, it's right here, and it's right here. Before I do that, I decided to tell you about one short story about myself. And so when I was an 8-year-old kid in Mexican television, there was this very famous wrestler, El Santo. And I used to watch those movies, right? And when I was watching these movies, I was always thinking, I would like to be there, right? So if you're wondering who of these 3 people I was thinking of, I was certainly not thinking of this being myself, the wrestler. For sure, not that guy, but that guy. And so every single time I was seeing these movies, I was like, I wonder why, what is this? What is he doing? What is he trying to accomplish? And most importantly, why is he being disturbed by these guys? I mean, he's doing real stuff, right? At that same time, these are some of the words. I decided to put some keywords that were things that inspire me, that I didn't have an answer to. I didn't know exactly the meaning. Keep in mind, I was 8 years old. But I just, just thinking about those, it excited me. Anyhow, so speaking about materials, now carbon nanotubes really initiated a big revolution in how we think about materials, specifically because now these type of nanotubes are going into all sorts of materials for different applications. One of the big problems right now is how to learn or how to synthesize them in a well-defined fashion, right? If we start dissecting a carbon nanotube into these 2 ends, the armchair and the zigzag. And we dissected even further to the smallest benzenoid fragment. We have on the left the CPP, on the right the cyclosine. These two were hypothesized and proposed a long time ago, and just, in quotes, recently synthesized. You have here CPPs for the first time in 2008, cyclosine derivatives for the first time at the end of 2020, just when the pandemic was, in full force. In my group, what we've done is taken this inspiration to create contorted nanotubes that we've synthesized, developed the synthesis for it, characterized, and more recently, this is still unpublished, pushed it into the area of catalysis. So what we've learned with this type of materials is that the inherent strain that we're putting into these nanotubes, about 89 kcals per mole in this particular compound, we can start using it to evolve dihydrogen, a very important transformation that a lot of people are researching through other materials. Now, these synthetic methods have helped us to develop other type of materials. So for example, here, by just changing the architecture or the connectivity of these tubes, we can go from a blue emitting tube all the way to the orange. And this is essentially the same architecture. We're just changing one bond at a time. The same type of architect or methodology. Well, picture there a really big, massive ChemDraw showing you a structure that essentially resembles a net. These nets, we've grown them. I guess you cannot see them, but we are calling them super nets because now they can function as essentially a nanographene compound. And these are proposed by others in the field as potentially functioning as conductors or semiconductors, depending on how they're put together. So with that, I'm going to change to the other topic I was telling you about, polynuclear reaction sites. We're interested in mimicking enzymatic processes. Specifically here in nitrogenase, you have a cofactor within that enzyme. That cofactor carries the cleavage of N2 into ammonia. A very fundamental transformation because that's where essentially fertilizers begin, right? With a nitrogen source, in this case in the form of ammonia. Note here that the distance between the iron centers in this cofactor is about 2.6 angstroms. In the metal, in iron metal, that distance, iron to iron, it's about 2.86, right? So I am showing you these because there's significant orbital overlap, so cooperativity between the metals in the cofactor that is hypothetically helping to break this very inert species. Keep in mind that dinitrogen is the second strongest bond in nature. So what we've done is we took the same macrocycle that I was telling you about, and we decided to put into these hydroxyl groups a ligand that can help us build architectures just like the one I'm showing you here. So a tetranuclear reaction site, very much like that one in the enzyme. And so that led us just recently to this type of molecular structures, specifically here shown for copper. We're working with other metals. The crystal structure tells us that we have metal-metal distances in the order of 2.7 versus copper metal, which you have distances on the order of 2.775. So we're just beginning to really see how we can put this together and now how we can transfer the reactivity of these particular systems. We're trying to use them to explore dioxygen reactivity. So here, this is a variation of the ligands that we've developed. That's the crystal structure of this compound. And if we follow these particular resonances, A, B, and C, upon exposure to dioxygen, so shown here in orange, you can see how they broaden out relative to when there's no oxygen at the beginning, and they sharpen back when we remove oxygen. Now, why is this important? Think about oxygen transport in nature, in your body. Hemoglobin, right? Hemoglobin binds O2 by a covalent bond. You form an O2 superoxide / peroxide to the iron center in that heme cofactor. That's how we transport O2. In this case, we have a non-covalent O2 binding. This is probably the first synthetic example of that type of binding, where we have about 12 weak interactions, but in concert, those 12 are really strong to then support that O2 species. Last but not least, we're working towards purification of water. If you have heard about PFAS, great. If you haven't, I'll give you the 2-minute spiel. PFAS are fluorinated chemicals, and we need to be worried about because they are in drinking water everywhere in the US. Likely this is the case in the world because they travel through rain. The EPI just published a few months ago, as you can see, March 14th, that the maximum contamination limit to be 4 parts per trillion, right? That's really low, really low. In the body, you can see, you can read all of the diseases and cancer that it brings upon us. And the problem is that they just live in your body for a really long time. So anywhere between 4 and 8 years, right? So if you've been exposed, right, you're gonna have those PFAS in your blood for a really long time after exposure. Not to mention, right, that it's in drinking water. So common materials shown here don't really address the problem when we look into environmentally relevant concentrations. All of this part of the chart is now the challenge, right? Is where we need to develop new materials to really address that problematic. These are 3 different groups in the US working towards that. There's a few more, including ourselves. And the point is to get, or to start treating samples contaminated at 1 microgram per liter, or 1 ppb, and then get it down to the nanogram per liter, or ppt. What are we doing? We're taking a modified architecture using that macrocyclic ring to then produce polymers, as shown there, that we can then start subjecting towards PFAS sequestration. In this case, PFOA is one of the most problematic ones. Fortunately, we were able to, in a few hours, to remove it from water. We can do it for a range of other PFAS, not only the long ones, but also the short ones, which are more or harder to remove, and the ones that industry are using now more commonly. And last, we just moved into using this in column mode experiments, where essentially we're now running just contaminated water through a column, checking the residual content after that column. This is what you see here in orange. And if we extrapolate the performance of this particular polymer, which we're calling it PFM2, we have a material that can remove with about half a kilo, clean 5,000 liters of water, which is compared to a 12-month lifetime if you think about a standard filter that you buy from Home Depot or Lowe's, right? That is the level of activity that we would like to have so that you can install it in your home to then have PFAS clean water. And with that, I'd like to thank, all of this was done by students in my group. I actually just worked for like a month and a half at the very beginning, and then right away I got a lot of students, and they just made everything happen. I'm grateful to them, to current students, former students, funding agencies, and you guys for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.
So I was interested in some of the small molecule activation you talked about at the beginning, because a lot of the carbon capture, carbon dioxide capture and activation is all based on amine chemistry for the most part, which works. but it seems like there's got to be a lot of other chemicals that can capture and activate that. Can you talk a little bit about how that might apply?
Yeah, so we would like to have essentially these planar motifs to then start activating CO2 and enforce the what is called the carbon monoxide reductive coupling, which is the difficult step where you start forming carbon-carbon bonds, right? So if we can do that, then we have a pathway to essentially regenerate a fuel, right? You take a fuel, you burn it, you produce CO2, you then reform CC bonds. So essentially what you're doing is, closing up the cycle, right? So that's one of the goals that we would like to address.
That was great, Raul. I found the discovery you have on non-covalent oxygen very intriguing. I was wondering if you could explain more about the forces that govern the oxygen-oxygen bonding, and I think that was a DFT prediction, and I was curious if there was some experimental also corroboration of that result.
So one thing that my group has been looking more and more into is CH bonding, right? So when we think about hydrogen bonding, we always think on the traditional NH or OH type of hydrogen bonding, right? What we've discovered, and this is based on others' work, is that you can polarize a CH bond to the point that it outcompetes an NH bond, right, for hydrogen bonding purposes. So in this case, what we have there is a very polarized bonds that are essentially functioning as a tiny little point charges, stabilizing that O2 species. And we have, I said 12, if you count all of the different CH bonds in that particular cavity. We're actually right now doing Raman experiments to learn more about that stretching frequency, how is that affected, and so on and so forth. But I'll be happy to tell you more in the coming months. But thank you for the question. Thank you.
I raised my hand, but then no one looked toward the back. Congrats again. Very neat work. So I may have missed it, but for the PFAS sequestration, what are the interactions that allow for that sequestration?
Right. So essentially, this molecule, this is the active ingredient, if you wish. So this molecule is binding the anion part by essentially having this CH bond heavily polarized. So in the polymers that we've made, we now have data showing that it's the anionic part being essentially sequestered in that pocket, and also any CF3 moieties that are lying around. So in a PFAS, the terminal part, right, the last carbon, which is the methyl, the CF3, that can bind also in that pocket. So we have double effect from these particular anion binders.
Got it. Thank you.